Billy the Kid is still regarded as the most iconic figure from the Wild West, from his early crimes to his time as a frontier gunslinger to his untimely death. What Wyatt Earp was to lawmen, he was to outlaws, an iconic character whose legendary legacy endures to this day. Billy the Kid is one of the most legendary characters in American history, whether it is because of his time spent with the notorious Regulators, his actions during the Lincoln County War, or his spectacular escapes from custody that ended with his murder at the hands of Sheriff Pat Garrett in 1881. Like so many mythologized historical individuals, it's not always easy to tell what's real and what's made up. First of all, Billy the Kid wasn't originally from the West and his name wasn't Billy. Born Henry McCarty, he was brought up in New York City by a modest Irish Catholic family as the first of two boys. Although his actual birth date is unknown, it appears to have been in September 1859 based on a baptism certificate that dates from the end of that month. McCarty's family was in complete disarray from the beginning. His parents immigrated to America from Ireland, where they were married shortly after he turned 20. Their home was a Manhattan slum, and Patrick, his father, did not have a long life. Henry McCarty and his brother were taken to Indiana by Patrick's widow after his death, where she met Bill Antrim. In 1870, they all relocated to Kansas, where she married Antrim in 1873. The family soon relocated even further west, and Henry McCarty began to run into problems there. The new stepfather of young Henry McCarty was a part-time prospector who often took long vacations. As McCarty's mother developed tuberculosis and became increasingly reliant on the men and boys in her family to take care of her, these absences increased in length and often. Antrim was only a few days' journey away when she passed away in late 1874. He found out about the death quickly, but he continued on with his vacation and missed the funeral. Henry McCarty, being a teenager, was essentially left on his own. He made an effort to work decent jobs, like a ranch laborer or a hotel employee, but he soon found himself in trouble with the law. He was arrested for small-time robberies of food and clothes, but his situation worsened when, in 1875, he was convicted of stealing several firearms from a Chinese laundry and imprisoned. But he managed to get out and start living as a fugitive barely 2 days later. As a fugitive, Henry McCarty had to go into hiding. He managed to find his stepfather's apartment in New Mexico and hid there for several weeks. Antrim tolerated the living situation for a while, but eventually the two had an argument and McCarty left for good, making sure to steal a gun and some clothes on the way out. This was his last contact with Antrim. McCarty took matters into his own hands and crossed the border into Arizona territory, technically making him a federal fugitive. However, the federal government's influence in the Arizona territory was not strong at the time, so McCarty was essentially free to do whatever he wanted. McCarty, now 16, used name Billy Antrim, and was nicknamed the Kid because of his youthful and boyish appearance, and later became known as Billy the Kid in Arizona. Found a job as a cowboy and ranch hand. In his free time, he enjoys going to bars, drinking, and playing cards. Billy the Kid still stole, too. He and an accomplice named John Mackey began stealing horses from a military fort and selling them. It was fun, but he couldn't stay out of trouble long enough to enjoy it. The first murder generally attributed to Billy the Kid occurred in 1876, although it was said that he had killed several members of the Apache tribe before. During a card game, Billy the Kid accused another player of cheating. The man was local blacksmith Frank Cahill, who called Billy a pimp. The fight begins when Billy calls Cahill a son of a bitch, and soon the men are fighting over Billy's stolen revolver. Billy overpowered Cahill, shot him, and caused the wound that killed him the next day. Billy the Kid is on the run again. When he unwisely returned to the area days later, he was locked in a stable until law enforcement arrived. But before that could happen, Billy sneaked out of jail again and stole another horse, which he rode to New Mexico territory, where he was still wanted for robbery. Billy the Kid never made it to New Mexico. At one point during the ride, he was surrounded by Apaches, who took his stolen horse and sent it on foot across the desert miles back to civilization. Somehow he managed to reach a friend's house and was allowed to rest there. After a week or two, he made contact with some local ranchers who made a living stealing cattle from a businessman named John Chisholm in Lincoln County, New Mexico. Yet at the same time, Billy the Kid appears to be trying to walk straight. At this time, Billy the Kid also called himself William Bonney, and began working honestly as a cowboy for Lincoln County rancher John Tunstall. But Billy the Kid's nice, steady job soon became turbulent due to disputes between Tunstall and his rivals. In 1878, Sheriff William Brady and his posse attempted to seize Tunstall's cattle worth approximately $40,000 to resolve a dispute over a large debt owed by Tunstall's business partners to a group of local rivals. In the ensuing confrontation, the sheriff and his team, loyal to Tunstall's rival, shot Tunstall from his horse and then shot him in the back of the head with his own gun, killing him. Billy the Kid was present when it happened and went to court to convince them that the sheriff and his team committed the murder. The Lincoln County Justice of the Peace was convinced, but before Brady could be arrested, officers loyal to the sheriff arrested Billy and threw him in jail. Billy didn't spend long in jail again. But this time, it was a U.S. Marshal named Robert Weidenman who arrived on the scene amid federal efforts to restore order and freed him, saving him the trouble of planning a third escape. After his release, Billy the Kid joined a group called the Lincoln County Regulators to avenge Tunstall. The Regulators managed to ambush and kill Brady, but that didn't end things. Now, Billy the Kid and the Regulators are in trouble with the new sheriff causing so much bloodshed. In July 1878, the Regulators and the new sheriff's forces clashed in what became known as Lincoln's Battle. In a local saloon, the Regulators were eventually besieged and encircled by members of the sheriff's posse. As the fight began to turn against the lawmen, troops from an army base eventually arrived. Billy the Kid and a few other Regulators were able to escape when they joined Brady's men and set the saloon on fire, even though at first no one knew which side they were on. Billy the Kid was now the main target of the local police force because he was one of the few Regulators who had survived the Battle of Lincoln. However, he devised a scheme to get out of jail by telling Governor Lew Wallace about a lawyer's murder that he had lately observed. To get a pardon in exchange for a witness testimony, he got in touch with the governor. The governor concurred and recommended that he arrest Billy and put him in jail in order to maintain appearances before getting his confession regarding the other murder. Billy accepted and carried out the skit. Billy the Kid came to the realization that he had been tricked and that he would most likely be hanged about 2 months later when there was still no sign of amnesty. Billy escaped from custody and fled once more. Billy the Kid again disappeared from view until January 1880, when he was found at a tavern not far from Santa Fe, drunk. Joe Grant, a stranger, entered the saloon and hovered around Billy's drink station. It's unclear exactly how the hostility between Billy and Grant grew. Some claim Billy mistook Grant for a bounty hunter who was coming to kill him, while others claim Grant was just a loudmouth inebriated man ready for a fight. In any case, Billy saw danger brewing and chose to cut it off at the pass. Billy, who was acting quickly, told Grant that he liked his revolver and requested to see it. Observing that it was only loaded with 3 rounds, he carefully turned the drum to reveal an empty cylinder and returned it. Indeed, Grant did eventually point his revolver at Billy and draw the trigger after the two men continued to agitate one another, but all that happened was an inaudible click. And with that, Billy moved quickly to shoot Grant in the head before he could get away. Billy responded, "I got there first. It was a game of 2. Billy the Kid was apprehended by New Lincoln County Sheriff Pat Garrett and his posse on December 23, 1880, at a location known as Stinking Springs. Garrett had to protect his inmates from a lynch mob that had gathered outside the train on the way to Santa Fe before he could get them into jail. But they arrived safely, and Garrett picked up the $500 state bounty that was placed on Billy's head. Billy declared, "I'll let them know what bad means if I ever get free," following his eventual capture. "People thought me bad before." Billy the Kid received a death sentence the next spring. The 21-year-old was reportedly yelled at by the judge to hang by his neck till he was dead, dead, dead. Legend has it that Billy told the judge he could go to hell, hell, hell in his final recorded words. Then, on April 28, 1881, in the evening, Billy was left in the jailhouse with a lone guard watching over him while the other employees went to a saloon. Billy persuaded the guard to let him use the restroom outside of his cell. After leaving, he beat the guard and took off his shackles. Billy stole his gun, shot him dead, and then limping to the warden's office with his legs still shackled, he took another rifle and sat at the window. Billy yelled down to the warden as he emerged onto the street to look into the shooting, "Look up, old boy, and see what you get," and after that, he shot him dead, seemingly without drawing any response from onlookers. Billy the Kid then succeeded in escaping by slicing through the shackles that were around his legs and robbing a horse. Then he left the town. Before his last meeting with Pat Garrett, Billy the Kid had only been free for 3 months. As soon as news of Billy's escape spread, the governor of New Mexico placed a $500 bounty on him, dead or alive. Garrett learned that Billy might be lodging in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, with a friend in July 1881. On July 14, Garrett managed to enter the residence and shot Billy dead as soon as he stepped inside. The notorious bandit had passed away at the age of 21. Locals contributed and raised $7,000 for Garrett after the governor's office declined to grant him his $500 reward for killing Billy, for reasons that are still unknown. The New Mexico Territorial Assembly decided to award Garrett the $500 he was due a little more than a year later. Regarding Billy the Kid's legacy, he finally rose to prominence as a notorious figure in American history, particularly among Wild West outlaws. Having said that, over time, some details of his criminal background might have been inflated. The majority of experts think Billy the Kid killed 9 men, not the 21 he once claimed to have slain, one for every year of my life. He is still considered a folk hero by some. People in New Mexico gathered funds in 1931 so that he may have a fitting headstone. Additionally, the governor of New Mexico had it flown back home after it was stolen in 1981 and later found in Florida. Over time, some admirers have gone so far as to propose conspiracy theories, stating that Garrett murdered the wrong man or staged Billy's demise so the gunslinger could continue living under a false identity. Billy the Kid is said to have lived to be 100 years old. However, there is no concrete proof that this occurred, and the official account of his death in 1881 is accepted by the majority of people. Some petitioned the governor's office of New Mexico in 2010 to grant Billy a posthumous pardon, claiming that 130 years prior, Lew Wallace had promised him one. However, the request was never fulfilled. In Fresno, California, the same year, a man by the name of Randy Guajaro paid $2 for an antique photograph. Guajaro discovered an authentication company that used facial recognition technology to validate his claim that the photo had Billy the Kid, which would make it the only known shot of the man. The company valued the photo at $5 million. Despite National Geographic endorsing the image, its validity has since been questioned. In 2017, there was a very similar issue involving another contested photo of Billy. Even still, the fact that a single picture of Billy the Kid is worth $5 million, more than a century after his passing, speaks something about the American public's ongoing infatuation with the outlaw.